Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. This is basically a June 23rd lecture that we couldn't have then, but I'm recording it now. Uh, so let's get started. And this will be part of your midterm exam as well, so it is important that we go through all the contents here. Okay, so let's get started. Before this lecture, we were talking about technical writing style, and in technical writing style, we basically discussed how to write or create drafts that are clear and easy to understand. So we divided that into two basically topics. One was how to write clear sentences, and then how to combine those sentences to create or write clear paragraphs. We have talked about that. So we said that if you want to write clear sentences, we should first use the normal word order. And the normal word order is in English it is the subject, verb, object kind of order. Okay, so every sentence must start with a subject, and then there should be a strong verb, and then the object. That is how we end up with clearer, more concise sentences. Okay, so the first thing that we must do is to use the normal word order. The second thing is we should write sentences that are neither too small nor too big. But this range, like whether it should be 10 to 15 words or 12 to 24 words or something like that, so it varies. Like in different settings you would find variation in these recommended limits. So if you're writing technical documents like manuals, so there it is preferred that you should have small sentences. So those sentences should be like maximum 10 to 15. If you're writing other type of documents like some technical reports or even research papers, there you can have sentences in excess of 20 words. You can go for say 20 to 24 word sentences. And then there are things that you can do to make those sentences clear. So there can be a long sentence, but that long sentence can have a parallel structure. So there may be two different type of things that you might be talking in the same sentence, but those things might be related in some way, or you might be talking about them in the same way. So if you're doing that, that means it has parallel structure. And parallel structure, though those sentences with parallel structure can be long, but they are usually clear. So this is not a very hard and fast rule. Like they you can bend this rule a little bit in some cases, but nevertheless, as a general rule, remember you should neither have very short sentences nor very long sentences. Okay, so the sentences that might be considered ideal would be sentences which have around say 15 words, or 12 to 15 or 12 to 18 words, something like that. Okay, so smaller than that and larger than that, so that might be problematic. May not always be problematic, but maybe. Similarly, we should be using the active voice where the subject comes first and the object comes in the end, the normal word order. So passive voice is not always recommended. The active voice, it lays the emphasis on the subject, whereas the passive voice, it lays the emphasis on the object. So depending upon what you want to emphasize, and usually if you remember all our discussions, we want to emphasize the subject, the person, or whatever it is that does the action. So we want to emphasize that. Sometimes in some situations we may want to emphasize the object. If that is the case, then passive voice would be more appropriate. So depending upon what you want to emphasize in your sentence, which is most often the subject, you should always try to use the active voice. If a sentence is not in the active voice, you should convert it into the active voice. Then we talked about parallel structures. So we said that there can be multiple elements in a sentence, and you can talk about those elements in the same way. That is parallel structure. Okay, so we looked at examples of these. Parallel structures, they make it easy, even for longer sentences, they make it easier to understand those sentences. Okay, so parallel structures are useful. You should be using parallel structures if you're talking about a list of items, or a list of elements, or whatever it is. So if you're talking about those things, you should be talking about them in a similar manner. That is what parallel structure is. That makes it easier for the reader to understand it. The final thing about writing clear sentences is to place the main idea first. What do we mean by that? So the main idea here is like usually it is the subject in a sentence. So you should place the subject at the beginning of the sentence. And why is that important? Because it gives context to the reader. So the reader understands whatever comes next. Okay. So it is easier for the reader to understand that. And the reader starts understanding the sentence right from the very beginning. However, if you delay it to the end of the sentence, then the reader has to read the full sentence in order to understand what it means. Okay, so the reader would be reading the sentence without appropriate context. The second thing that we discussed in our last lecture was about writing clear paragraphs. Okay, so just as important it is to write clear sentences, it is very important that you put those clear sentences in the correct order to create a paragraph that is easy to read and easy to understand. Okay, so what should you do about that? So every paragraph should start with a topic sentence. Every paragraph should start with a topic sentence. What is a topic sentence? It is the sentence that presents the main idea of the paragraph. So that should come first. And then afterwards we should have other sentences that talk about the main idea, that expand on the main idea, that list different subtopics associated to the main idea, something like that. Okay, and we should be doing that in a coherent manner. Coherent is, what is coherence? Coherence is when all your sentences of the paragraph, they are focused on one subject, one idea, one topic. Okay, so we say that they are coherent. We say that they are coherent. So how can you achieve coherence? So you can achieve coherence by using the following techniques. First, use the dominant position. Okay, so what does that mean? So that means that uh, in every sentence, the main idea, or whatever it is that you're talking about, it should appear at dominant positions, and that position is the subject position. Okay, so we looked at some examples of that. I guess we looked at a paragraph that was about contrast. So it started with the main idea or the topic sentence where we talked about contrast, then soft contrast, hard contrast, and all these terms, they were at dominant positions. So all the sentences, they started with these words, contrast and soft contrast and hard contrast. Okay, so we looked at those examples. You can go and look at the previous lecture, and you'll find those examples. Then you should maintain class or member relationships. Okay, so class or member relationship between the things that you're talking about, they also bring coherency in your paragraph. So what do we mean by that? So you can also look at the example from our last lecture. Then you should provide transitions between sentences. So some sentences, maybe they might add uh, might add more meaning to whatever we talked in the previous sentence, so you should add appropriate transition words for that. Some sentences, they might contrast, uh, might want to contrast or differentiate one thing from another that we talked about in the previous sentence, so they should use appropriate contrasting words or transition words, sorry, that show contrast. So these words basically help connect the sentences together. Okay, the sentences other than the topic sentence, they help these to connect those sentences, and that is what we want or need in order to create coherence. So coherence is basically that all the sentences are connected to each other in some way. Okay, they are not standalone statements, they are connected to each other. So if they are connected to each other and they are connected to the main topic of the paragraph, okay, so then basically we have achieved coherence if that is the case. Finally, we said that all the sentences in the paragraph should have some level, and they should be arranged by level. They should, like, it should be possible for you to arrange those sentences by level. And we talked about the different levels. So the first level goes to the topic sentence, the main idea of the paragraph, and then if you are explaining the main topic, okay, or if you are adding a subtopic to the main topic, so those sentences should go at level 2. If you talk in more detail about the subtopic, then that sentence should go to level 3. Otherwise, if all your sentences are about the main topic, those sentences should stay at level 2. So there should be a hierarchical relationship among those sentences in your paragraph. Okay, you should be able to see that relationship. You should be able to put the sentences in that relationship. So if you're able to do that, then your paragraph will be more coherent. In this lecture, we will be talking about revising for clarity. Like, you have written your first draft, and then that is not the end of it. Then you should be constantly revising your draft to basically improve it. Okay. So how do you revise for clarity? And another thing that is important is to organize your document so that it is more clear, the document as a whole. So we have started from sentences and we went into paragraphs, and then now we are talking about the structure of the entire document. Okay, so this is how we are moving. So organization basically refers to the entire document that you have written. Okay, so it is about something about that. In the end, we will try to come up with or with a checklist for technical style, and if you follow that checklist, so that will basically help you write and produce very clear and easy to understand technical documents. Okay, so how do you revise for clarity? So when you revise your drafts, what should you be looking for? So you should be looking for language that might be confusing, might have more than one meaning, might be hard to understand. Uh, you should be aware of the use of language or aware of constructions of language that might make your document imprecise, okay, and difficult to read or understand. So these are the things that you should be looking for, and we look at techniques that will help us revise a document for achieving clarity. How can we organize document for clarity? So organization is also very important. Organization is important both at the level of paragraphs and as well as at the level of the entire document. Okay, even at the level of sentences. So we talked about writing clear sentences, that it should be organized in this way: subject, object, verb. Okay, so that is sort of organization that we are talking about at the level of sentences. Then in paragraphs, we said that we should have first the topic sentence, and then we should have other sentences that talk about the main idea introduced in the topic sentence. So that is the structure of paragraphs. Similarly, this applies to the entire document. So there should be some sort of introduction to the document that should basically define what that document is all about, or what is the purpose of the document, define any terms related that might be required to understand that document, etc., etc. So we'll talk about these things in organization for in organizing for clarity. So let's start. So how can we revise a document to make it more clear? So in order to make a document more clear, there are certain things that we can do. We've talked about these things before as well. We've mentioned these things. The first is to avoid strings of choppy sentences. Okay, so we'll explain these one by one in detail later on. Let me first go through this list and then we'll go through these in detail one by one. So one is avoid choppy sentences. Choppy sentences are small sentences, okay? The other is to avoid wordiness, to achieve conciseness. So everything should be concise. Then we should be avoiding redundant phrases. Again, it helps in achieving conciseness, like you make the document more concise, and it also makes it clearer and precise and easy to understand. Avoid abstract and general terms. We talk about that. We've already talked about it before. You should be very specific in technical documents. So you should be using numbers and specific quantities instead of general terms. So we'll talk more about that. Use there are sparingly. So you should not be using there are very often. So we'll come across examples where we'll see that there are is being used more than it should be, and we'll try to fix that. You should be avoiding nominalizations. So we'll talk about what nominalizations are and why should you avoid nominalizations. And then you should be avoiding noun clusters. Noun clusters are very common in technical documents. Like, by very common I mean like they can easily appear, and in some cases, for example in say research papers or something like that, some authors they tend to use noun clusters. They sort of deliberately create noun clusters. So that might make your document look more sophisticated, but it may not be very easy to understand. And if you're talking to a very specific audience that has a very good level of understanding of the subject that you're talking about, then maybe you can get away with noun clusters. But if that is not the case, for laymen you should never use noun clusters, okay? So you should be using very simple language. Look at it, like what do we mean by that? Finally, you should be using gender neutral language, okay? You should not be using language that addresses just one specific gender. If the material that you're talking about, if that material applies to just one specific gender, then fine, no problem. But if something applies to both the genders equally, and you mentioned just one specific gender, okay, male or female, then you are being sexist, and that is not a good thing. You're not being very sensitive, okay? So you should always use gender neutral language. Now let's go through these one by one. The first one is avoid choppy sentences, okay? Strings of choppy sentences. What does that mean? If you're using very short sentences, that results in choppiness. Choppiness is like there is no continuity, no relationship between the sentences, okay? Something like that. Why? Because you're using short sentences. Each sentence presents an idea, and that idea like seems to be equal to the other ideas presented in the other sentences. So everything seems to be equal. In paragraphs, that should not be the case, and that is never the case. So you have the topic sentence, which is the topic sentence, the most important sentence of your paragraph at level 1, and then you have other sentences that talk about the topic sentence, okay? So there's a relationship. Those sentences are at level 2. They are not all at the same level, okay? So some ideas are more important and some ideas are not that important, okay? So the topic sentence presents the most important idea of the paragraph, the central idea of the paragraph, and the other sentences they add or explain that central idea. Now, if the sentences, the way you have written those sentences, if they do not reflect that relationship, then your paragraph would be choppy. You will have strings of choppy sentences that would not make a lot of sense. So what you can do is you can combine those short sentences and you can create relationships between the ideas presented in those sentences. So one idea may be presented as the central ideas, while the other ideas may be presented as subordinate ideas. Okay. So this is how you can do something like you can get rid of choppiness. So we have one example. The first example that we have, the first paragraph we have is basically a paragraph with a lot of choppy sentences. So the bowl is made from stainless steel. This material makes it lightweight and durable. The weight of the bowl is 4 pounds. The use of stainless steel also allows for easy cleaning. Now, these are all sentences. They're all right, correct, and they all sound to be equally important. Okay. So that makes this paragraph choppy. Okay, choppy means like there is no flow of ideas. So there is no relationship between, like, all sentences, they seem to be standing for themselves only. Okay, so when that is the case, then that the reader does not find it very easy to understand. Okay, so it is not that easy to make sense of this paragraph. Okay, so you're talking about 4 or 5 different things. They may be related, but the relationship is not that clear. Okay, so the objective is not that clear. If you read at this paragraph, so maybe people find it difficult to find why did you write it in the first place. Okay, here in the second one, we sort of create a relationship between these sentences. Okay, so we present one sentence or one idea as kind of the main idea and the other are subordinate to it. Okay, so if you look at this sentence, we say because the bowl is made from stainless steel, it is durable, easy to clean, and lightweight, only 4 pounds. Okay, so now we have connected these sentences. We have created a relationship between these sentences. So the first one, the bowl is made from stainless steel. So that is kind of your central idea, and the other have become subordinate to this first sentence. Okay, so because the bowl is made of stainless steel, it is durable, easy to clean, and lightweight. So now, like, here you have 4 different facts that do not seem to be connected. Here you have all the facts connected together. Okay, that brings about clarity, and that is what we mean by this is what we mean by choppiness. This one. So although you have all the facts in front of you, but the facts do not seem to be related to each other. But here the same facts are presented in a way where there seems to be a very clear relationship between them. Okay, so that makes it clearer to the reader. Okay. Next is we should be avoiding wordiness. Okay, so we should be using words with economy. We should not be wasting words. Okay, so how can we achieve that? How can we avoid wordiness? So there are different things that we can do. We can get rid of redundancy. We can get rid of unnecessary intensifiers such as very. Okay, too much. So people tend to use these words a lot. If you use it while speaking, maybe not that big a deal, because in speaking there is very little you can do about these things, but in writing you should be very careful. Unnecessary subordinate clauses, we'll look at examples of that. Unnecessary repetition. So some repetition at times is good, recommended, you're encouraged to do it, but sometimes it is not that good, it is unnecessary. So we'll look at when it is unnecessary. Unnecessary use of prepositions and then prepositional clauses. Okay, so we looked at that before as well. This is also not recommended. And unnecessary use of passive voice. So passive voice, in some situations helpful, it is recommended. But in most of the situations, you should not be using passive voice. Passive voice makes the sentence wordy, introduces weak verbs, and shifts the emphasis from the subject. That might not always be recommended. Okay. Having said that, that wordiness is not that good and you should avoid it. You should also be not going to the other extreme. Like you should not be writing telegram style sentences. Okay. So that would make them choppy. Then you would have choppy sentences. So again, there's a fine balance that you should be aware of and you should be practicing. So you should not be going to for very long sentences, and you should not be settling for telegram style sentences. Okay. So let's see at these different ways of avoiding wordiness one by one. First is redundancy. Okay, so redundancy is like using more than one word to convey the same meaning. Okay, so for example, if you look at these two sentences, the sentence in red is the one with redundant words. It says the tuning handle is a metal protrusion that can be easily grasped hold of by the hand to turn the gears. Now grasp means to hold something with the hand. So if you use the word grasp, then you shouldn't be saying hold of by the hand. You should not be mentioning these other words. Okay. So just grasp is enough. So if you put the same sentence in this way, like you say, the tuning handle is a metal protrusion that can be easily grasped to turn the gears. So now this sentence avoids redundancy. Okay. So by avoiding redundancy, you make it more concise and you make it a little clear. Okay. So some readers might get confused that grasp also means holding something by the hand, and you're mentioning here by the hand. So what do you mean by that? Okay. Although he or she might be clear about the meaning of the word grasp, or so so if you use redundant words, that they also they not only increase the number of words in your sentences and making them more wordy, they also like may confuse the reader. Okay, so you should be avoiding redundant words. One. Two, you should be avoiding unnecessary intensifiers such as very and unnecessary subordinate clauses. Okay. Now we have two examples here. The first one shows both the unnecessary intensifier as well as the unnecessary subordinate clause. Now look at that. Look at the sentence. It is made of very thin glass that is milky white in color. Okay. Now very is the unnecessary intensifier here. Like you can easily say it is made of thin glass. Okay, instead of very thin glass. Thin glass can also be can it also conveys the same meaning. That is milky white in color. Using these two words, that is, you are basically creating a subordinate clause. Now milky white in color is a subordinate clause to the first one. Okay, why? Because you use uh, these two words, that is. So this is unnecessary. You should not, like, there is no subordinate relationship between the two. Like, just because the glass is thin, it is not milky white. Okay, it is not milky white just because it is thin. There is no such relationship between these two. Okay, these are two different things and they are not dependent upon each other. So you should not be putting them in a way that basically creates that sense. Okay, glass is milky white because it is very thin. No. Okay, so it is made of thin milky white glass. If we put it this way, we get rid of the unnecessary intensifier very, and we get rid of the unnecessary subordinate clause, that is, like, we get rid of this relationship between these two classes. So it is made of thin milky white glass. That is how you should put it. It makes it less wordy and it also makes it much clearer. Okay, so here you would think it is made of very thin glass that is milky white in color. here you might think that the glass is milky white because it is made of very thin glass, because it is very thin. That is why it is. Okay, you might think like that. In any case, this subordinate clause is unnecessary, so you should avoid it. Here's another example of an unnecessary subordinate clause. Two important concepts that go along with this field are inventory control and marketing. Now that go along with this field, yeah, that go. So by using this word that, we are basically creating a subordinate clause here, which is not required. So you can easily put it like this. Two more important concepts in this field are inventory control and marketing. So you can easily put it this way. And you will get rid of the subordinate clause. You will make the sentence more concise and easy to understand. Avoid unnecessary repetition. Okay. Now we talked about repetition. At times repetition is good. You should be repeating the keywords, or you should be repeating the important ideas uh, in some paragraph, but at times repetition is unnecessary. You should be able to differentiate between the two. So here's an example that I hope will help you in doing that. So you'll feel it by reading this sentence. These sentences, you will feel that there is some kind of repetition going on here, which can be easily avoided. Like, it does not convey anything important. There is no important idea in here. Okay, that is being repeated. So if it were an important idea, important keyword that needs to be repeated, fine. But here we are not doing that. We're just repeating a certain word categories unnecessarily. So look at this example. Tools can be classified into two general categories and be broken down further within these categories. The categories are hand tools and power tools. So by repeating the word categories again and again, we are not like adding uh, any more clarity to this paragraph. In fact, like, the reader feels that the word categories is appearing more than it is warranted to appear. Okay, so you can put this sentence in this form. You can simply say tools can be classified into two categories: hand and power tools. Okay, hand and power tools. So this way, you avoid unnecessary repetition. Now bear in mind, this is different than the repeating uh, the keywords or the main idea at dominant positions. It is different than that. So if you remember the example that we looked in that case, where we talked about contrast, then soft contrast and hard contrast. So there we were repeating the term contrast. First it was simply contrast, then it was soft contrast, then hard contrast. There it is helpful in clarifying the main idea of the paragraph. Okay, but here in this case it is just the repetition of a word categories that does not add any meaning to uh, the repetition of which does not add any meaning to this paragraph. Okay, so next is we should be avoiding unnecessary use of prepositions and prepositional phrases. Okay, so you should also be using prepositions with care, because you're adding extra words when you use them. So look at these two examples. The lead weight arms sit on each side of the specimen holder and can be broken down into two parts. Can be broken down into two parts. So the portion that is in italics and bold, here we are basically, these are prepositional phrases that you are using here. Sit on each side, so you can replace it with just one word. For example, located. The lead weight arms are located. Okay, instead of sit on, you can use the word located. Okay, and can be broken down into two parts. You can simply say have two parts. So The two parts of the arms are, again this is repetition, the two parts is being repeated more than it should be. So you can just simply specify a list and where you have the names of the two parts. So just like the way we do it in the corrected version. The lead weight arms located on each side of the specimen holder have two parts. Instead of can be broken down into two parts, you simply say have two parts, okay? And instead of sit on, you say located on, okay? So although we replace the word sit with located on is still there, but it is I guess more clear than the previous one. This language sit on is a little informal, and this language located is a little formal. So sometimes in technical writing, like you should not be using informal language. Sometimes you can use it, no problem, but sometimes you need to be careful. You should be using more formal language that conveys uh, the meaning in a more formal way. Okay. Similarly, the last thing that you can do and you should do is to avoid the unnecessary use of passive voice. So we've talked about passive voice in detail in our previous lectures. Here we would just look at an example where depending upon the kind of document that you're writing, or depending upon the purpose of your writing, this use of passive voice may be considered unnecessary. Okay, so look at the sentence. Keeping a desired overpressure is accomplished by using a pressure drop control valve. Okay, so here this sentence is in passive voice, and here the emphasis is on keeping a desired overpressure. The emphasis is on keeping a desired overpressure. Okay, the emphasis is on keeping on, and the subject which actually does that, the pressure drop control valve, so that is presented as the object. So there is less emphasis on that. Now if you're talking about some process where talking about the desired overpressure is more important, then maybe the passive voice is fine. But if you're talking about some machinery and its components, and one of those components is the pressure drop control valve, then you should put it in the active voice. Okay, you should put all the emphasis on the pressure drop control valve. Okay, so that is what happens here in this sentence. A pressure drop control valve maintains the desired overpressure, or keeps the desired overpressure. Okay, so now the emphasis is on the pressure drop control valve. So again, like depending upon the situation, depending upon whatever you want to talk about or whatever you're talking about, you should select which whether to use active voice or to use passive voice. Okay, so if you're talking about the pressure drop control valve and its purpose, you should use active voice. If however that is not important, and more important is the fact that the overpressure should be maintained, okay, then you should put this sentence in the passive voice. Okay, the next thing that we talked about that we can do and we should do to avoid wordiness is by avoiding redundant phrases. Okay, by avoiding redundant phrases. Okay, so this was one. So first, avoid strings of choppy sentences, then avoid wordiness, and we looked at those different methods to do that. Third one is avoid redundant phrases. Okay, so what are redundant phrases and how we can avoid that? So these are some examples of redundant phrases, and we commonly use these phrases, okay? But these are redundant nevertheless, due to the fact that, so you can simply say because. Employed the use of, you can simply use the word used. basic fundamentals. Now basics and fundamentals, they are the same things. Okay, so you can simply either say basics or fundamentals. Completely eliminate. So when you eliminate something, that means it is completely gone. That is why it is eliminated. If it is not, if it is still there, then it is not eliminated. So completely eliminate is not a correct term to use. Okay, so you can simply say eliminate. Alternative choices. Alternative and choice, they convey the same meaning. So you can simply say alternatives. Actual experience. Okay, so actual experience is always actual. If it is not actual, then it is not experience. So you can get rid of actual here and simply say experience. The reason is because. Okay, now here we are not reducing redundancy, but the reason is because. Yes, we are reducing redundancy in meaning, not in words. So the reason is that because, and the reason is, so they are basically conveying the same meaning. So although we are not reducing words, but we are reducing redundancy in meaning. Connect it together. If something is connected, so it is together. So you can simply say connected. Final result, result. Okay, result is always final, but we commonly use final result. Okay, so this is a redundant phrase. We should not be using it. Prove conclusively. So when something is proved, then it is conclusive. Okay, if it is not conclusive, then it is not proved. So prove, you should be using proved in as few words as possible, concisely. Now these are not exhaustive examples, like this is not an exhaustive list, so there may be other phrases that might be redundant, and you should try to identify those phrases and replace them with more concise phrases. Okay, the next thing that you should avoid, you should look for is abstract terms and general terms. Okay, abstract and general terms, and you should be replacing those with simple, concrete, and specific words. Okay, so if you are given a choice between abstract, highly technical, general words, abstract words, highly technical words, general words, and simple words, concrete words, and specific words, then you should be selecting the second one. Okay, the later, simple, concrete, specific words. If, however, your document demands that you define that you use certain technical words or certain abstract terms, then what you should do is you should define it first. You should define it to the user that this is what this term means, and then you can use that term. Okay, um, other than that, you should be using very simple, concrete, and specific words. Similarly, if you're writing for laymen, if you're writing for uh, audiences that are not that well versed in the field that you're writing about, or that they are distant. Okay, they are distant, physically distant, or like they cannot approach you to ask about whatever you have written. So that can be due to physical distance or any other gap, or the distance is in terms of knowledge, they are less knowledgeable. Then you should avoid using jargon. Jargon is a technical language of a specific field. Okay, so you should not be using terms that are specific to that field and that have a specific meaning or connotation in that field. So you should be avoiding more simple words and specific words that everybody can easily understand. There are some examples, we have talked about these as well. Okay. What are those examples? The examples for general terms are excessive, numerous, few, soon, frequently, more often. Now these are general terms. They can mean anything for anyone. Okay. So depending upon the person, depending upon the background of the person, so these terms can mean anything. words of judgment such as it is effective or it is significant or this thing is mediocre. Okay, so these are also not very clear. These are also abstract. Okay, they do not convey any specific meaning. So you should try to be more specific. If something is significant, you should know like how significant. You should mention how significant. If something is effective, you should mention how effective it is in concrete terms. Okay? If for example, we say that this cough syrup is very effective in relieving cough. Okay? So what do you mean by very effective? So if you have specific numbers, in 90% of the cases, this cough syrup rids the patient of the cough. ठीक है, तो then we have a good number in front of us. So then we know that we have like 9 out of 10 chances that our cough will be cured by this particular cough syrup. Okay, something like that. So this is what we mean by being more specific. So you should not be using terms that are abstract or general and can have any meaning. So you should ideally try to avoid these terms, abstract and general terms. However, if you use these terms, you should immediately clarify. Okay? You should immediately clarify these terms. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean by excessive, or what do you mean by effective or frequent? Okay, so you should immediately clarify that. The next thing that you should avoid is to avoid the use of there are. Okay, you should be using, if you want to use it, you should use it very rarely. Okay, that is what sparingly means. So avoid the overuse of indefinite phrases such as there are, there is, there will be. Now why you should avoid it? You should avoid it because it pushes the subject into the middle of the sentence, okay, making the sentence a weak sentence. So that is the purpose. It basically appears there are, there is, there will be. It appears at the position of the subject, which is a dominant position. So there are, now this is a very weak construction at a dominant position. Okay? And the main idea of the sentence or the subject of the sentence, it is pushed into the middle of the sentence. Okay, so that makes the sentence weak, and if it becomes weak, then it is like it may not become difficult to understand. It may still be easy to understand, but the emphasis is moved from the main subject to like it is diluted. The emphasis on the subject becomes diluted. So look at these examples. There are 3 common types of splices that are used in electrical connections. Okay, so there are basically dilutes the effect of 3 common types of splices. And there are, like, you can create a sentence without there are, and that sentence would be more meaningful than this form of it. So you can simply say 3 types of splices are commonly used in electrical connections. Okay, now this is more clear. Why? Because the subject hits you at the very beginning. Okay, so it is not hidden it is not like pushed back by these 2 words there are. Next sentence, look at the next example. Through research, I found that there are 6 hairstyles that most companies carry in stock. Here again, there are is not that, like, it is used. It is not useful. You can get rid of it. Through research, I found that most companies stock 6 hairstyles. Okay, so that results in more concise sentence and more clearer than the other one. Similarly, the last example, there are 6 main parts to a small sailboat. So you can simply say a small sailboat has 6 main parts. Okay? So that makes it less wordy and clearer. clearer than sentences that use there are. Okay. The next thing that you should do is you should be avoiding nominalizations. Okay, so what is nominalizations? So nominalization is the action of like converting a verb into a noun. So you have a verb and you convert it into a noun. How do you do that? You do that by adding suffixes such as ion, iety, ment, ness. Okay. So for example, divide. So you convert it into, divide is basically a verb. You make it a noun by adding ion, division. Okay. Develop is a verb, and you convert it into a noun by adding ment, development. Okay. Similarly, for example, let us look at other examples. Determine. Determine is a verb. You convert it into a noun by adding tion, tion, determination. Okay. So these are basically, this is, if you do something like this is nominalization. You should be avoiding it. Why? Because you should keep action as action. You should not convert it into a noun, a static noun. So a noun is just a noun. Okay. An action is, it shows something being done or something happening. So if you have sentences that do not have strong verbs, those are weak sentences. Or if you replace strong verbs with static nouns, so you basically end up with a weak sentence. So what you should do is you should find the true action in your sentences and express it with strong verbs. So look at these examples. For example, research showed the division of waste products into biodegradable and non-biodegradable substances. Okay. So now we do not have a strong verb here. The research showed. Showed is the only verb here you can say, but that is not the true action in your sentence. Okay, the true action is that waste products can be divided into biodegradable and non-biodegradable substances. Okay, so you can put this sentence like this: research showed that we can divide waste products into biodegradable and non-biodegradable substances. Okay, the sentence is more wordy here, but it is more wordy because you are removing nominalization. And this wordiness will not hurt us. Like this is fine, because we are using a strong verb instead of a weak noun, a static noun. Determination of this, look at the second example. Determination of this percentage figure calls for an analysis of various errors and failures that occurred in planned purchases and in allowances on merchandise given to employees. Okay. Now it becomes difficult to find out the true action in this sentence, or to understand this sentence. Okay. If you put it this way, determine this percentage figure by analyzing the errors that occurred in planned purchases and in allowances on merchandise given to employees. So now you have a strong verb, determine. Like you're being asked to do something. Okay, so this sentence it avoids nominalization and it is more clearer. Okay, here determination of this percentage figure calls for an analysis. Okay, so here things are not that clear, but in this particular sentence it is things are more clear, and it seems to be less wordy here. Okay, but here wordiness should not be that big of a concern in this particular case. If a sentence has nominalizations, the first thing that you should do is get rid of those nominalizations. Okay, so now if you get rid of nominalizations, you basically make your writing more clear. Okay, nominalization, it makes it difficult to understand things. If you look at these two examples, so I guess these ones, the ones in green, they look more they are more They are easier to understand relatively. Similarly, you should be avoiding noun clusters. Now, what are noun clusters? So, the cluster is basically more than one thing. So, noun clusters are when you combine three or more nouns together in a phrase. So, that makes it a noun cluster. And noun clusters, they typically arise in technical writing. Okay. So, what they can do is they can make technical writing difficult, especially for the layman. Okay, so if you're writing for laymen, you should specifically avoid noun clusters. And even for people with some know-how or knowledge of the field, you should try to avoid noun clusters. Okay, now look at these two. Look at this example. In the first one, noun clusters are being used and a very simple sentence becomes very difficult to understand. So if you read this sentence, allowing individualized input variants of data process entry will result in higher morale in the keyboarders. Okay, so because of this individualized input variance, this noun cluster, and the sentence that has to be like because of this noun cluster, the sentence that we end up with, this sentence is difficult to understand. Like, it presents a very simple idea in a very difficult form. The simple idea is this one: we will have higher morale if we allow the keyboarders to enter data at their own rate. So, individualized input variants, that is what it meant. Variation in the input rate or input of individuals. That is what it meant. Okay. So here it is specified in these words. Uh, if we allow the keyboarders to enter data at their own rate, data at their own rate is basically individualized input variance. Okay. So this sentence is way more clearer than this one. Okay. And why? So one very important reason is because we have got rid of this noun cluster, and we are using uh, verbs, and we have broken this noun cluster and we have replaced them with simple and concrete terms that are easy to understand for a very wide range of audience. Okay. The last thing that we should take care of is by avoiding sexist language or using gender neutral language. Okay, so a language is considered sexist when the pronouns indicate only one gender when both are intended. So you're writing something that applies to both the genders, but you're using pronouns that only indicate one gender. Okay, so that language is considered sexist. It is both insensitive and inaccurate. Okay, so it is neither sensitive nor accurate. So what should you do? So you should first of all, you should be able to spot that the use of this language here is sexist. The second thing that you should do is you can either use an infinitive. Okay, infinitive means that you do not specify the person. So you use terms like, if you look at this example, it will be more clear. Or you can talk in the plural. So you can talk in the plural. Plural does not have any gender. So जमा कसी का आप इस्तेमाल कर सकते हैं, उसमें फिर आपको जेंडर का ख्याल रखने की ज़रूरत नहीं होती. So this can be done. Okay. What you should not be doing is bazokat people tend to write this way: he/she or s/he. Okay. So you should not be using phrases like these. Okay. Occasionally, if you say he or she, that might be acceptable, but if you like use it frequently, so then you would be destroying the sense of the passage. So whatever you are talking about, So you will ruin it by using the phrases he or she all the time. Okay, so you shouldn't be doing that. So look at these examples. The first example is not a good example. Like it is an example of a sexist language. The clerk must make sure that he punches in. Now the clerk can be a male or a female. So we cannot just say he. It can be a she as well. If you say the clerk must make sure that he or she punches in, that is also not that, does not sound that good. So the alternatives are, first use an infinitive. Okay, the clerk must make sure to punch in. To punch in. To is the infinitive. To punch in. To go in. Okay, to finish the job. Okay, so if you use the infinitive to, so then you don't need to specify the gender. Or you can use the plural. The clerks must make sure that they punch in. Now they is used for both males and females. Okay, so then it does not become sexist. It no longer is sexist. It is gender neutral now. So you should be aware of such use of language in your technical writing, and you should know how to fix it. So these are some of the ways through which you can fix it. This way is not the recommended way. Okay, like using the phrases he slash she. So you should not be using this thing all the time. This is not that recommended. Okay, occasionally, once in a document, maybe it is fine, but not all the time. Okay, you should not be using it more often. Okay, the next thing is organizing for clarity. So that was revising your document for clarity. What should you do to revise your document so that it becomes more clear? The next thing is, what can you do in terms of organization to make the report or the document or the manual that you're writing to make it more clear? Okay, or the letter or email that you're writing, what can you do to make it more clear? Now, organization is also very important. Writing clear sentences in a paragraph is important. However, to produce easily readable and understandable documents, you need a clear organization. And how can you achieve clear organization? So the first thing is you can have introductions. So mostly, like any document that you read, it has some sort of introduction, or each section of it has some sort of introduction. So you can use context setting introductions. So introduction can set the context for your document. What is this document all about? What are we going to talk about in here? What is the purpose of it? After reading it, what would you be able to achieve? So all these things can go into the introduction. Okay, the next thing that you should do is you should place important material first. Now material first means, in a sentence, if you should have the subject first. In a paragraph, you should have the topic sentence first. In a document or in a section, you should have the most important paragraph first. The most important paragraph that talks about the entire section, that should come in first. If you look at the document, the most important section or chapter should come first. So chapter 1, the introductory chapter, say for example, that should come first. Okay, so placing important material first, that is what it means. Using preview lists. So preview lists, we'll talk about that. So you can use preview lists to talk about important things, and then you can repeat the terms used in that preview list, and you can elaborate those terms and repeat those terms. Okay, using repetition and sequencing. So repetition and sequencing, this is also related to preview list. So we'll look at examples of preview list. So the name might be very fancy, but these are easy things. You have been doing it. For example, you can say there are 4 provinces in Pakistan: Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Balochistan, Sindh. Sorry, 5 provinces, and Gilgit-Baltistan. So this is a preview list. So when you name these provinces like this is a preview list, and then you can talk about these items in the list. You can say the capital of Punjab is Lahore, in the same order. So we'll talk about these examples later. Using repetition and sequencing, okay, we'll talk about that later. And using structural parallelism. So structural parallelism does not only apply to sentences, it also applies to the entire document. So you can have paragraphs with the same structure. Okay, so you can have paragraph number 1 with the same structure, 2 or 3 with the same structure. The same structure keeps on repeating in different paragraphs. You can have that. This is also called structural parallelism. Okay, so we'll look at examples of that, and that also makes your document easier to understand because the reader finds the same structure over and over again. Okay, so the reader does not need to make an effort to understand the structure of your paragraphs again and again if they are structured in much the same way. So let's look at these one by one. Use context setting introductions. So introductions basically provide a framework to the reader to grasp the later details. So introduction of a book talks about the rest of the book. Introduction of a chapter talks about the rest of the chapter. Introduction of a section talks about the rest of the section. Okay, or a subsection, it talks about the rest of the subsection. So you should always have introduction everywhere. Okay, if you're writing a section with 5 or 6 paragraphs, the first paragraph should be the introductory paragraph about that section. What is that section going to talk about? The remaining paragraph should talk about each of the things that you mentioned in the introductory paragraph. Okay, so what it does, it provides context to the reader, like कि आगे क्या होने वाला है, ठीक है, आगे क्या होने वाला है. So the reader would read the chapter or the section or the paragraph or the entire book or document with a certain context in mind. उसको पता होगा कि आगे क्या क्या चीज़ आने वाली है, क्या चीज़ उसको expect करनी चाहिए, वगैरह वगैरह. So the purpose of introduction is to orient the readers, ठीक है? To give an orientation to the readers. Orientation means what this document is all about, ठीक है? So what to expect and what to not. And how does it do it? How do the introductions do that? So introductions can do that in many ways. Okay? They can define terms. So you can include definitions of key terms and concepts. Okay? Especially if you are describing a machine or a process. So you can provide definitions of key components of the machine there, and then you can talk about all those components in the later paragraphs. You can tell the reader why you are writing. What is the reason that you wrote this document, that you created this document? So it works really well in letters and memos. So people want to know, why did you email them? Why did you write a memo to them? Why did you write a business letter? Okay, so this is their purpose. And then state the purpose of the document. So why should the reader read that document? What will happen if the reader reads that document? Okay, so what the document will do for the reader. So if you provide these things, so usually introductions they provide these things. They have these things in them, and that is how they give some context to the reader. We'll look at these different things one by one. The first one is define terms. So this is an example. So it talks about training, for example. Training is the process of preparing an individual to perform in a certain manner in a predictable situation. So this is a definition of training. And then the training process has 4 steps. This is a preview list. So it gives you the preview of the 4 steps of the training process that you'll talk about later. Okay, needs assessment, program development, delivery, and evaluation. So this is one way introductions can provide context to the user, by defining terms, by providing this preview list and naming terms. Okay. The second one, why are you writing? Why you as the writer why you are writing? So we said that this works really well in memos or in letters or emails. Okay, so here's an example from a memo or an email. So at our recent committee meeting, you raised a number of questions about our new word processors. I couldn't answer all your questions then, but I have checked with our computer personnel and I can now provide you with the information you requested. So this is basically the reason of why this memo or email is being written. Okay, this is basically the reason for that. So introductions should also uh, provide that. So now the reader would know what to expect ahead. ठीक है, क्या उसको आगे मिलेगा, क्यों उसको ये पढ़ना चाहिए. ठीक है. So now the reader has been provided a context. The third is state the purpose of the document. Okay, so what is the purpose of this document? Like, what would you achieve after reading this document? So here is an example where the purpose of a document is stated. Okay, so although adhesive bonding is a basic function of formal fill seal FFS packaging, it is usually the least understood element of the package. Adhesives play a vital role in medical device packaging today. They not only maintain package integrity, but also make possible the physical combining of a wide variety of protective materials. In FFS packaging, adhesion must be achieved in line with a number of other packaging operations, some of which are not always conducive to good seals. This article, here comes the purpose of the document. So what is the purpose of this document? This article will discuss the role played by adhesives or sealants. It will characterize their behavior in different types of packages or various stages of package formation and use. So this is basically the purpose of this article. So if this is what you want to achieve, like you want to know about the role of adhesives or sealants, you want to know about the behavior of different types of packages at various stages of package formation and use, so you can read this document. Okay, and after reading it, hopefully you'll understand it. That is what the purpose basically means. The purpose of a document means. Now introductions can do all these three things or can do some of these three things, but they should provide a reasonable context to the reader so that the reader finds it easy to understand your document. That is the first thing that you should do. The second is place important material first. Place important material first. So in a sentence, the important material, the subject should come at the beginning. In a paragraph, the topic sentence should appear at the beginning. And similarly, in a section, the first paragraph is the most important spot. So there, all the important material should appear in the first paragraph then. Okay. So beginning of a section or a paragraph is an emphatic spot. So it is a powerful position. Okay. Anything that appears there, that means you want to emphasize it. Okay. So that is being emphasized. Placing important material first emphasizes their importance. So if something appears first, that means it is more important. Why? Because it gives context and orientation to the reader. It gives context and orientation to the reader, so they know what to look for or what to expect as they read further. So what can you do? You can put definitions here, you can put key terms here, you can put statements of significance here. So important statements or key terms or definitions, they can be placed at the beginning. Okay, places which are emphatic spots and which are basically there to emphasize certain things. For example, look at this example. The bill of materials BOM is an essential part of every MRP plan. For each product, the BOM lists each assembly, subassembly, nut and bolt. Okay? The assets of a business are and this is one example where the important material comes first, and the important material here is the bill of material. You want to talk about what the bill of material is. This is another example where basically definition and list of key terms comes first. Okay, so you can put a definition first, or you can put list of key terms and their definition first. For example, the assets of a business are the economic resources that it uses. This is the definition, assets of a business. And then there's a list of it. These resources include cash, accounts receivable, equipment, building, land, supplies, and merchandise held for sale. Okay. This is how, these are two examples where you can put important things first. In the first example, there's a statement of significance. In the second, there's a definition, and then a list of key terms related to that definition that you have provided. So this is how, these are examples of placing important material first. This is how you should be doing it. Okay, the next thing that we can do in order to improve the organization of a document is to use preview lists. Okay, so what are preview lists? So these are lists, okay, and lists basically means they have more than one element. Okay, so usually those elements are keywords. So preview lists contain the keywords to be used in the document, and they can use to indicate organization. So if you are using a list, usually, for example, if you have a sentence here, so the assets of a business are the economic resources that it uses. So here you have a very simple list. These resources include cash, accounts receivable, equipment, building, land, supplies, and merchandise held for sale. Although we did not write it in the form of a list, we will see that the preview list has a specific form. Okay. Nevertheless, they mention a list of items. Okay. List of key terms, and you can then explain or elaborate on each key term. Okay, so what do we mean by cash, or what do we mean by accounts receivable, equipment? So in the next sentences you can talk about each one of them. Okay, so that is what basically preview lists do. They introduce keywords or terms, and then those keywords and terms are basically explained later in the document in more or less the same order. So that gives kind of a structure to your document. The preview list, it basically gives a structure to your document. Why? Because you introduce the list or the terms in that list, and then you explain each term in later paragraphs or sentences. Okay, so it basically gives a structure to your document. What are the components of a list? Now, a preview list here, we basically here we are introducing it as a formal list. So as a formal list, it has these basic components. First is an introductory sentence that ends in a control word. Okay, and then it is followed by a colon, and then a series of items. Okay, then a series of items. The control word is a generic name for the items in the list. Okay, so for example, look at these examples. These examples will clarify. This is the introductory sentence. Wood is machined by one of two basic processes. Now process is here the control word, and then it is followed by the colon, and this is the introductory sentence. Wood is machined by one of two basic processes. So this is the introductory sentence. It ends in a control word processes, and it is followed by a colon. So what are those processes? Orthogonal cutting and peripheral milling. So this is one example. This is the basic list, the basic preview list. Okay, we can make it more formal by getting rid of the colon and changing the order of things slightly, like bringing the control word in the middle, not exactly in the end. The two basic machining processes for wood are orthogonal cutting and peripheral milling. So you can think of this as an informal list. This is kind of an informal list. Okay, this is kind of an informal list. So this is also an informal list. And these lists are horizontal. Horizontal means the items in the list are written in a horizontal sentence. So we can have a vertical list as well. Wood is machined by one of these two basic processes, and then a colon. So this is the introductory sentence that ends with the control word followed by a colon, and then a vertical list of the processes: orthogonal cutting, peripheral milling. Now this gives structure, or it indicates organization in your document. Next, you can basically write a paragraph, say, on orthogonal cutting, and then a paragraph on peripheral milling. Okay, so it basically indicates structure in what is going to come later on in the document. Okay, so the preview list, it basically indicates organization of your document. It improves the organization of your document as well. Next is you can improve the organization by using repetition and sequencing. And this is specifically like you use it in combination with preview lists. So you first use the preview list, and then you repeat the terms used in that list, and you present them in the same order or sequence as you presented them in the list. For example, look at this example. So first of all, we set up list, we use the preview list, or we set up the preview list. What is that? The power supply required to move the segments of the manipulator can be of three types. So we are talking about power supply types: pneumatic, this is the preview list, hydraulic, and electric. So the first one is the preview list. Now next, we want to repeat these terms: pneumatic, hydraulic, and electric. That is what repetition means: restating key subject words or phrases in the preview list. Pneumatic, here is the repetition: power uses compressed air to supply power to certain components. It is usually used for lighter loads. So here, this is the discussion of pneumatic power supplies. Then we say hydraulic power, and they are in the same order: pneumatic, hydraulic, electric. Hydraulic, and then in the end, electric. So this is what sequencing means. Repetition means we are repeating these terms. Hydraulic power uses a compressed fluid for power and is usually used on heavier loads. Sequencing means we are placing these keywords in the same order as in the preview list. Okay, so we are not violating that order. So if you mention pneumatic, hydraulic, and electric, and then you say hydraulic power uses compressed air, electric power uses this, and pneumatic, so then you have messed up the sequence. Okay, so you should keep the sequence intact. That adds that improves the clarity of your document. Electric power is probably the most commonly used power source because it is easy to use and can handle most loads, light or heavy. The different kinds of power supply can be used in the same robot system. Okay. Now repetition and sequencing, it does not like apply only to paragraphs. So it applies to different sections of your document as well. If you mention different sections, so you should sequence those sections in the order that you mentioned those sections previously, and you should also repeat keywords in those sections. So this applies to your entire document, okay, not just to paragraphs. So this applies to this repetition and sequencing applies to your entire document. Similarly, you can use structural parallelism, and that also improves the clarity of your document. Okay, so structural parallelism means that each section of a document has the same organization. So here we mentioned two paragraphs, but you can have chapters or sections. If your chapters and sections, they are organized in much the same way, then that would make it more easy for the reader to understand that material. So here is an example. We basically illustrate this example using two paragraphs. Here is a paragraph about job design, and then we have a paragraph about job analysis. Okay, so if you look at the structure of these two, the structure is the same. Both paragraphs start with definition, then there is a list of terms, and then those terms are defined. Okay, so here is a definition. Job design defines the specific work tasks of an individual or group. Job design focuses on 4 ideas. Here is the list of terms: job scope, job depth, job enlargement, and job enrichment. And then the terms are defined. Job scope involves the number and variety of tasks performed by the job holder. So here is repetition as well as sequencing. Job depth. Okay, so list mentioned first job scope, then job depth, then job enlargement, and then job enrichment. Okay, job enrichment. So all the terms are repeated and all the terms are presented in the same sequence as they are mentioned in the list. This is the structure that is being followed in this paragraph. First definition, then followed by a list of terms, and then followed by the definition of those terms. Okay, and the same structure is followed here in this paragraph. First definition, job analysis determines this. Job analysis produces both job descriptions and job specifications. So this is kind of a list. A job description explains, this is terms, the definition of the terms, job analysis and job description, job specification. Sorry. A job description explains what the job is and what the duties, responsibilities, and general working conditions are, and the job specification describes the qualifications that the job holder must possess. Okay, so again there is repetition as well as sequencing. So this is basically structural parallelism. The same structure is being followed in different paragraphs. Okay, so if you do that, this is basically not related to a single sentence or a single paragraph. It is basically related to multiple paragraphs having the same structure. If you do that, you would be doing something that is called structural parallelism. We have already defined it and talked about it, but in the context of sentences. Now we are talking about it in the context of paragraphs, multiple paragraphs. So you can extend this idea to chapters, sections, if it is possible. So all those sections can have the same organization, the chapters can have the same organization. Okay, so this is what structural parallelism means, and it basically helps in improving the organization of the document, and it makes the document more clearer. So these are the things that you can do from the point of view of organization of your document to make it more clear. Now here this is a very simple checklist for style. Like you can get a print out of it, and whatever you write and whatever you revise, you can look at this list and you can look at your document, and then you can start checking if you have done all these things. Okay, so this is important. This is not exhaustive, like you can add certain things to it, we can add, but this is the simplest one that I got from your book. So you can basically go through these things. This is basically the crux of our discussion so far. So let's go through these quickly, and you can then I would recommend that you get a printout of it, and you always keep it next to you whenever you're writing. Okay, so you should be following these rules whenever you're writing. So first you should be looking for sentences with passive voice. If there are, change them into active. Okay, and you should do it carefully. Like at times passive voice might be more appropriate, but mostly active voice is what you should have. Then you should look for sentences shorter than 10 or longer than 24 words. So you can combine shorter sentences or you can break up the longer sentences. You can do both. Okay? You should use parallel structure in each sentence. If there are coordinate elements and they are not parallel, make them so. You should make sure that the main idea comes first in your sentences. The subject is the first one there, and there are no there are and those things which basically dilute the subject. Then you should make sure that each paragraph has a clear topic sentence, and then you should try to make the paragraphs more coherent by reviewing for repeated terms, the way we discussed earlier. Key terms should be placed in dominant positions. Class and membership relationships should be kept intact and highlighted. You should use appropriate transition words to connect the sentences better. You should evaluate the sentence levels of each paragraph and revise sentences that do not clearly fit into a level. So every sentence should be at some level in a paragraph. If a sentence does not have a clear level, either revise it or get rid of it. Okay. Then for revision, you should again read carefully for instances of following problems. You should revise for nominalizations. We talked about what these are. You should revise for the frequent use of there are. You should revise for choppiness, wordiness, sexist language. Okay, if you've done that, then you should check these things. Then you should revise for organization. So you should look at your introductory material and you should find out whether it serves these purposes. It defines key terms. It tells why you're writing, and it tells the reader what is the purpose of the document, like what would the reader be able to achieve after reading that document. Similarly, at the level of the document, you should look whether the important material comes first, whether you are using preview lists effectively, whether you are repeating keywords from the preview list, and whether there is structural parallelism in the paragraphs and sections or chapters of your document or not. Okay, so this checklist will help you improve your writing, and it will help you write more clearly. This is the end of this lecture. I hope you would find it helpful and easy to understand. I'll upload this material, both the slides and the video recording, and wish you all the best. Thank you.